Are women more selfish than men? In a weird way, philosopher Martin Heidegger actually seems to kind of think so, although he doesn't directly allude to it. So there's two different concepts that Martin Heidegger has in his works. Um, well, there's a bunch of concepts. But we're going to talk about two in particular here. It's about being authentic versus being inauthentic, and more specifically, how you relate to other people. He refers to as solicitude. So, one of these, I think, actually characterizes women and how they treat other people, and the other one characterizes how men tend to treat other people. And so, we're going to be talking about masculinity, femininity, masculine compassion, feminine compassion, and how those relate to these Heideggerian terms of authentic solicitude and inauthentic solicitude. Now, just a warning, I'm just getting into Martin Heidegger's work. I'm not an expert on him the same way I am an expert on Nietzsche. Um, but I'm going to give it a shot anyway. Okay. So this is from a book called The Philosophy of Heidegger by Michael Watts. I have been reading Being in Time in tandem with this, but it's probably the hardest philosophical text I've ever written. So I actually do need a lot of help to understand it with a secondary text like this. So we're just going to get into it. So Heidegger describes inauthentic solicitude as the type of concern that leaps in for the other, but is characterized by a form of domination because the manner of helping reduces others to dependency. In leaping in, we encourage the other to give up their struggle and we take over that which is their responsibility. Thus, although we appear to be helping them, in fact, we are enslaving them by making them dependent on us. Heidegger asserts that this mode of helping another fails to recognize the other person's existential project, and thus one is treating them like a thing or a what. So this thing I think actually describes a lot of women and a lot of moms actually, and how a lot of guys, their moms basically like hug them too much growing up. And their dads didn't do this part, which I'm about to explain here, which is authentic solicitude. So, in contrast to this, authentic solicitude assists others in a manner that helps them to take responsibility for their own life, to stand on their own 2 feet and take care of themselves. Heidegger describes this as a leaping ahead of the other in a way that frees the other to face their being, thereby clearing the path for them to assume the burden of their own existence. Instead of taking over another's task for them, one enables them to do it on their own. In so doing, one acknowledges the other's unique existential project. So I'm writing about this in my book, and I've talked about it in a few other videos of mine. But I think most societies, most cultures, uh, they have sort of like an accelerator and a brake, right? Traditionally in the US, we refer to in politics as the liberals are the accelerators or the progressives, and the conservatives are the brake. What's interesting is I think that there's, in a similar way, I think there's like a hot and cold energy that each human tribe or society has had, right? And the way that I characterize that is through the terms greatness and wellness. So greatness looks to the future. This is something that Ralph Waldo Emerson said in his self-reliance essay, that greatness looks to the future. And I think authentic solicitude, the way that it's uh, written out there, is very in line with that. Of like, okay, well, instead of you, whenever you're trying to help somebody, instead of you just trying to do all the work for them, you strengthen them and you encourage them, put them on the right path to do the work themselves. That's something that is going to be meaningful for them, right? Now, so this greatness energy, whatever you want to call it, usually is more in a traditional nuclear family, is going to be driven by the dad. The dad is the one that's traditionally has a lot more like tough love, right? They are willing to sacrifice your present self, their children, the happiness of them in the present for a greater, something greater in the future, you know? And Heidegger, Martin Heidegger, he was a man, right? So I think with him, naturally, he's going to look at this stuff and a lot of philosophy through a bit more of a masculine lens because he can't help himself. That's the only perspective he's ever known as a man. And I think his characterizing and value judgment of authentic solicitude kind of reflects this. With Heidegger, he doesn't necessarily think inauthenticity is inherently bad. He actually thinks that it's an inevitable part of the human condition, us living in a they world. I'm not going to get into that too much here because it's going to be way too complicated for this video. Um, but clearly, he does believe that being authentic from his standpoint is more preferable to being inauthentic, right? So with inauthenticity for him, it's more the sort of the attitude of like doing stuff for other people. And from his standpoint, from a male standpoint, that's going to be um it's a form of domination, right? So like if somebody's really trying to improve their life and you just go in and do all the work for them. A lot of times, if it's coming from a man, they don't actually care about you. If they really cared about you, they would do more of that authentic solicitude where they would give you the right tools and the right perspectives to figure it out on your own. That's typically what a good dad is going to do. They don't do all the work for you, they strengthen you to become a good, capable person, right? You might not like it in the present because you have to learn and it's tough love, but you're going to appreciate it in the future. Now, if your dad actually didn't care about you or some other male figure or whatever that just couldn't really be bothered, then instead of actually going through the effort of trying to show you the way, they'll actually just drag you along with them, right? Or they'll just be like, well, this thing's easy for me. I've done it before, so I'll just do it for you, right? And so, from a male perspective, that is probably bad. It's not a form of care, right? On the other hand, if you're a woman and you do that, that's what women do for their children. So imagine if you're just living in a world where, you only just have that cold, tough love all the time of like, oh, you're just going to make you and help you figure it out. Well, okay, that might sound great and all that, but I'm telling you, what's probably going to happen is that person ends up kind of growing a bit cold themselves. And sometimes, you know, it's like the accelerator and the brake, like I said at the beginning. If you're just constantly accelerating, something bad could happen. You need the brake every once in a while too, right? On your journey of self-improvement, self-development, it's not all just going to be linear. It's going to go through waves like this. And if you imagine your self-improvement journey as like you driving a car, well, every once in a while, you need to go to a gas station to refuel, to recharge, right? And so I think that's the role that femininity has for men who are striving for greatness. That's the traditionally what's been more like the womanly role, you know, is that sort of warmth, that wellness. Like if masculinity, if striving for greatness, looking to the future is cold, it's like the harsh cold outside, then uh the wellness, the feminine is that warm fire inside of the cozy log cabin, right? If you don't have that, eventually you're gonna freaking freeze to death, you know. However, if a masculine man who is driven by seeking for the future at the expense of the present um, does that sort of inauthentic solicitude type thing of just doing the thing for you without actually giving you the opportunity to go solve it yourself, in a way, it's a form of contempt because he doesn't actually think that you're good enough. So let's say that you're trying to become, I don't know, a professional basketball player or whatever, right? And you're like a young kid. Well, if you're a young kid that has a ton of potential, then um, your dad or whoever is probably going to really push you. However, if you have no potential at all and you just suck, then your dad's going to be like, "Oh, good job, Timmy. Good job. You tried really hard." They won't really care as much. If they really gave a shit, they would actually push you a lot more, you know? It's funny because this actually happened in my own life where although I was always athletic, I wasn't like, potentially become a pro at anything athletic. My brother was. And so with me, my dad wasn't easy on me by any means, but he saw that with the sports that I played, it wasn't like this guy's probably going to become a pro someday, you know? So he was kind of pretty chillax about it. But my brother, on the other hand, especially with tennis, he was like prodigy status, right? So he pushed him a lot more. And because he pushed him a lot more, that was almost sort of a sign of like caring a bit more, right? It's more sort of that authentic solicitude, right? And so it's interesting because it's like, okay, as men, we cannot help but think and project our own masculinity onto certain values and things that we see in our lives and say, okay, well, from our standpoint, from our point of view, if we are to let somebody, uh, give somebody the space to achieve their own greatness, that's our way of of showing them that we care. We actually give a shit about them. And if we do the opposite and do all the work for them, that means we don't care about them. We just like couldn't be bothered. So, hey, well, we're already an expert at this. Let me just do it for you. All right, fuck off. Right. But from a woman's standpoint, a lot of women's standpoint, I should say, it's almost the exact opposite. And Heidegger's a genius, but his sort of standpoint of how he frames these two things here, I think, is indicative of his sort of that masculine lens that he's blinded by, because we need that feminine part too. If we just take this part of his philosophy at its surface level, then we would have to come to the conclusion that women are more selfish than men. That because they don't do the authentic solicitude as much as he calls it, then they must be selfish. When in reality, that couldn't be further from the truth. It's just that women, femininity, tend to live a bit more in the present, focus more on wellness, on warmth. And so, if you have the contrast, and this is why it's so important to have a fatherly figure and a motherly figure. Most of us have a motherly figure already, but a lot of people don't have a fatherly figure, right? Even if you do have a father, he might not, in the modern day, he might not be like a traditionally like strong dude, you know? You want to have a father figure driving you to greatness, right, at the expense of the present. But then you also want a motherly figure that is keeping you grounded in the present at the expense of the future. And then that way you balance yourself out. So that way it's the best way to ensure that you are progressing in the long term, but also being able to like actually enjoy the process and not hate life and not burn out, you know? Um, so yeah, and I think this is stuff that I'm going to be talking about quite a bit in my book. I don't think that masculinity and femininity are like I don't want to say inherent, but there's just certain physiological, psychological, and spiritual needs that everybody has that naturally most women tend to be better at that wellness warmth side, and most men tend to be better at that greatness side. It's the self-overcoming instinct, as Nietzsche would call it, in terms of the masculine part, and the self-preservative instinct in terms of women, which he unfortunately admonished and said the self-preservative instinct is bad. Um, but there's a utility in both, because if you don't have a little bit of self-preservation and you're only focused on striving for greatness into the future, then you're probably just going to die. You're going to die in your pursuit of greatness. I mean, what is war? War is a bunch of men pursuing greatness, sacrificing their present selves for a future idea, even their own physical being, right? That is self-overcoming in a nutshell. That's the most badass way to do it. But imagine everybody's doing that. Everybody's going to die, right? And then your society doesn't survive, you know? So it's important to have women to sort of bring men back down. Now, one of the issues in the modern day is that because things are so tough financially, because the material circumstances are very difficult for a lot of people now, and combined with the gradual decadence that's occurring with the United States and all that, now most people are sort of in that survival mode. They're too much in this mode of wellness, where a lot of men typically would be focusing on overcoming, right? To become better, to strive for the future. Well, if you don't have a future to look forward to, then that spirit of yours is going to die and decay, and you're going to start reverting to this sort of wellness instinct that feels a bit less natural to you. This is why, although yes, women are struggling, but right now, as a whole, men are struggling a lot more, especially young men, because they don't feel like they're able to strive for greatness anymore, right? Like there's nothing to look forward to in the future. There's nothing to strive for, or they do like some crude representation or a crude uh, sort of simulation, I guess is a better word, of actually reaching for greatness, is in like doing masturbatory self-improvement exercises and and self-improvement strategies that don't actually change their life. They get like a video game version of feeling like they're changing something, but then their life circumstance doesn't actually change. So yeah, that's that's sort of all I got to say about this topic so far. Do I think that women are more selfish than men? Well, it depends on your perspective, um, I personally don't think so. I think the way in which we show our care for people is very different. And the way in which Heidegger specifically points it out in authentic solicitude versus inauthentic solicitude, I think is a great way to sort of frame how men and women tend to treat other people. And there's a lot of miscommunication there because of that. So, anyway, let me know what you think in the comment section below. Thanks so much for watching. I'm going to be covering Heidegger more on this channel here. I'm going to be making a lot of errors about what he's saying because he's so freaking hard to read. It's like he's difficult to read even in German. And then apparently from German to English, like there's a lot of things that just can't be translated. So it's almost like I can't, it's almost like if I'm watching a movie, right? But then the movie is all in German, and then the subtitles are all like messed up, and I could like barely read the subtitles. Like that's kind of what it's like to delve into his philosophy. But from what I've learned so far from his philosophy, it is incredible. He actually fills in a lot of the gaps that I personally found was missing from Nietzsche's philosophy. He's actually very critical of a lot of aspects of Nietzsche, but you could also tell that he's a Nietzschean himself and just the way in which he goes about things. So I'm going to cover that more in future videos. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know what you think in the comment section below, and I'll see you next time.